Good afternoon. We're rolling into another edition of Voices from the Middle, and we're joined this today with a colleague, Kathleen Sack. And given the circumstances, I wanted to just jump right in and talk about the virus and how you see companies responding, and what your suggestions are for people who are in mid-level management, Kathleen, to see what they can do to help address this problem.
All right. Thanks, Michael. Thanks for having me. It's definitely front and center on everybody's mind, and how people are dealing with it in management positions kind of depends a lot on the organization and their leader. So what I've been seeing through own experiences or through colleagues is that, middle managers are really play a critical role in what people who are successful, they're focusing on the person first. So yes, you want to get the work done, and yes, you have priorities, but to really very regularly check in with their employees that report to them and others, and just check with them personally. How are things going? How's it working if you're working remote? How's your family? And that starts the conversation, and then people tend to, transition to business. And I think that's been really important, and people feel much more connected that way since you're not connected and working in the same office. I think the other piece to keep in mind is, depending on if organizations are used to being remote workers, there's been a lot of adjustment, especially in the early weeks of what that was like, and for managers to continually check in and make accommodations. I mean, I've heard of situations where, hey, do you need a monitor? We can have a monitor delivered to you instead of working off your laptop. Let me walk you through how to set up, your first video call, and just a little bit more hands holding. And they also have to be delivering a message from the top. So depending on that top executive team and that top leader, if they're doing a good job of communicating on a regular basis, managers, it's easy. You can kind of pick that up and take it down to your own staff. If they happen to be in an organization where that's not working, it really becomes the responsibility of the manager to make sure they're not just communicating with the individual, which I just mentioned, but also communicating about the business and what's happening, and delivering bad news. There's going to be situations where you're going to have to be delivering probably some bad news to people. People are experiencing layoffs, furloughs, reductions of hours, getting the right coaching for that, and not being afraid to ask for that help, to work with your staff, and if you have to deliver bad news, to be prepared. It's never easy. So they really are in a lot of different news situations. I've advised them, partner with your HR partner, and if you have a great leader who's doing it well, that's your role model, and follow that. If not, talk to others who are doing it well and watch what they're doing, and that's going to help you set the tone for how you need to work with your teams.
Kathleen, at this time, how do you handle that balance between focusing on the person, as you said, but also getting the work done? So there could be a tendency for people to fall into one side or the other. And I don't know if there's any simple words, but what are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, I don't know if there's a simple answer. What I have seen work well lately is kind of starting the day off with the check-in on the person, and literally scheduling time maybe after lunch with the check-in on the business. Kind of separate them. It sounds very mechanical, but that seems to be working. And the other piece is, many organizations and many teams and many managers, they already had staff meetings in place, or they may have had one-on-ones, making sure in this scenario of video world primarily and phone, you have to change a little bit of your style and how you're talking to your people. When you're face to face, there's conversation, and sometimes people talk over, but it's that natural ebb and flow of conversation. You don't have that luxury when you're doing it this way. So you've got to be mindful of how you're speaking, but also focus on the work. One example is, I know one manager does a 15-minute daily check-in on the priorities of the business. It's short, it's sweet, but it's very regular. It's at 11 o'clock. And that seems to put people in a rhythm and a routine, a little bit tighter than what it was, but it helps relative to getting the work done. So sort of gauging what's working best in your organization, but I think putting in some structure, putting in some routine is going to make it more important and put the emphasis on the business side.
That's good counsel. Let me ask you, just to wrap up this part of the conversation. Um, as this thing as we start to get back to quote normal, what's going to be different and what's going to be the same? What do you think?
Ah, good question. I think different is you're going to have a lot more people working remotely than ever before. Um, those leaders who were, naysayers on, oh, that remote thing isn't going to work. Well, they've seen it work. So I think organizations are going to have to be more flexible, and employees are going to want that flexibility. That may be different. I think what's going to stay the same is people are anxious to get back to a routine that was. It's just like when you drive to work and your normal route gets twisted up because of a bad wreck, it does kind of throw your day off a little bit and you have to make an adjustment. You want to get back into some routine. So for managers to maintain some normalcy of what was, whether it's how they do a meeting, whether it's, hey, we used to get pizza the first Friday of every month, we're going to continue to do that. Keep those kind of regularity pieces, and that's going to be the same, and that's going to help people, I think, get back into it. I think businesses are going to learn to operate very differently depending on your industry, and some of that will be good for some people. Others, it's going to be a big adjustment because it's going to be a change. So I think another thing to pay attention to is leading your staff through change, and it's going to be a different world. So just because we're back to work, the change process is probably just starting at a different level. So being aware of change management, being aware to talk to employees about change, I think that's going to be really critical.
Kathleen, thanks so much for your comments.
You're welcome. Thank you.